The first shovel struck something that wasn't stone. Marcus Reed froze. The sound echoed across the empty hillside, sharp enough to make even the wind seem to stop. His gloved hands tightened around the worn wooden handle. For a long moment he didn't move. The red clay beneath his boots had been fighting him all morning, and nothing in this forgotten piece of land had ever made a sound like that. He knelt and brushed away the dirt with his fingers. A corner of rusted metal appeared beneath the soil. "What are you?" he whispered. There was no answer, only the distant cry of a hawk circling above the dry fields. Marcus looked across the property. Acres of cracked earth stretched to the tree line. Broken fences leaned in every direction. Dead grass bent under a cold autumn breeze. The place looked exactly like everyone in Harper County had described it. Worthless. A place where crops refused to grow. A place smart ranchers had laughed about for years. A place they were happy to sell for almost nothing. Behind him sat his old blue pickup truck. Dust covered every window. A faded toolbox rested in the truck bed beside a dented water cooler. Everything Marcus owned fit inside that truck. He brushed more dirt away from the metal object before stopping himself. No, not yet. He covered it again with loose soil, stood slowly, and looked toward the empty road leading to town. Nobody needed to know, at least not yet. Only 18 months earlier, Marcus had been standing in a crowded warehouse outside Dallas, wearing a clean work shirt with another company's name stitched across the chest. Every morning started before sunrise. Every evening ended after dark. He worked harder than anyone on the loading crew, but each paycheck disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived. Rent, gas, bills, his mother's medicine. There was never enough left for tomorrow. One rainy Friday afternoon, the warehouse manager called everyone together. Business was slowing down. Cuts had to be made. Marcus listened quietly as names were read. His was the last one. The ride home felt longer than usual. Rain slid across the windshield while windshield wipers pushed it away again and again. His phone stayed silent. No new job offers. No missed calls. Just another reminder that next month's rent was already waiting. That evening he sat beside his mother on the small porch of their rented house. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. She wrapped both hands around a warm cup of tea. "You remember your grandfather?" she finally asked. Marcus smiled a little. "The farmer. The stubborn farmer," she corrected, laughing softly. "He used to say land remembers the people who refuse to quit." Marcus looked down at the cracked wood beneath his boots. "I don't even own a backyard." She disappeared inside the house and returned carrying a small leather notebook. The brown cover had faded with age. Its corners were worn smooth from years of use. "I've been saving this." Marcus accepted it carefully. Inside were handwritten notes. Simple sketches, crop ideas, weather observations, lists of places his grandfather had hoped to visit one day. Tucked between 2 pages rested an old county map with one section circled in blue ink, Harper County. His grandfather had written only 6 words beside the circle, "Don't judge the land too quickly." Marcus stared at the sentence. "What does it mean?" His mother slowly shook her head. "He never explained." The notebook stayed beside Marcus every day after that. Weeks passed. Job interviews came and went. Each ended the same way. "We'll call you." Nobody ever did. One afternoon, while searching through old county property records online, Marcus noticed something strange. The land inside the blue circle was for sale. The price was unbelievably low, almost suspiciously low. The listing included only 3 blurry photographs, dry fields, an old shed with half the roof missing, a rusted windmill, that was it. Curious, Marcus drove 3 hours to Harper County. He stopped at a small diner before looking at the property. The conversations around him became quiet when he mentioned the address. An older rancher chuckled into his coffee. "You thinking about buying that place?" Marcus nodded. The man smiled without humor. "Son, there's a reason nobody wants it." Another customer joined in. "Nothing grows there. Never has. Money disappears faster than rain." Marcus thanked them for the warning. Still, Something about his grandfather's notebook refused to let him walk away. That afternoon, he stood alone on the forgotten hillside, holding the faded map in one hand while the cold wind pushed against his jacket. The circle matched perfectly. The land was exactly where his grandfather had marked it decades ago. Marcus looked across the empty acres once more. Most people saw failure. He couldn't explain why. But he felt like someone had left him a question that had waited years for an answer. And now, beneath the quiet soil where his shovel had uncovered that hidden piece of rusted metal, the land seemed ready to ask another one. The sun climbed higher, warming the hillside, but Marcus couldn't stop thinking about the sound his shovel had made. Every step across the property pulled his eyes back to the same patch of ground. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It felt like the land itself was asking him to stay. He forced himself to leave. If there really was something buried there, digging without knowing what it was could destroy it. He needed time to think. The old pickup bounced along the gravel road until it reached the county office. Inside, faded photographs of local farms covered the walls. A ceiling fan turned slowly overhead, pushing warm air around the room. An elderly clerk looked over his glasses. "You buying property around here?" Marcus nodded. "I'm trying to learn its history." The man disappeared into a back room and returned carrying a thick folder covered in dust. "This place changed hands a few times," he said. "Most owners didn't keep it long." Marcus flipped through yellowed papers, tax records, old surveys, boundary maps. Then one page caught his attention. A survey from nearly 70 years earlier showed a narrow road crossing the property. Marcus frowned. The road wasn't there anymore. "What happened to this?" The clerk leaned closer. "Funny thing, nobody really knows. It just disappeared. That's what people say." Marcus folded the survey carefully and thanked the man before heading outside. One mystery had become two. Back at the property, he climbed onto the roof of the broken shed. From there, he could see almost every acre. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the fields. Then he noticed something strange. The grass wasn't all the same color. Most of the land looked dry and pale, but one long strip running across the center stayed darker than everything around it. Almost like something hidden still rested beneath the surface. He pulled out his grandfather's notebook, the faded map. The blue circle, then another page. A rough sketch showed several trees surrounding a straight line. Marcus looked toward the property. Only 3 old oak trees remained. They lined up almost perfectly with the darker strip of grass. His heart beat faster. "This can't be a coincidence." The wind answered with a soft whistle through the broken windmill. The next morning, Marcus returned with a rented metal detector. Hours passed. Nothing. Old nails, rusted wire, pieces of broken farm tools. Every signal raised his hopes before ending in disappointment. By late afternoon, frustration settled in. Maybe everyone had been right. Maybe this land really was empty. He leaned against the truck, wiping sweat from his face. A voice interrupted his thoughts. "You still here?" Marcus turned. The older rancher from the diner sat on horseback near the fence. "I figured you'd leave yesterday." Marcus smiled politely. "I almost did." The rancher looked around. "You seem like a good man." "Then why warn me away?" "Because I watched 3 families lose everything on this land." Marcus stayed quiet. The rancher continued. "They borrowed money. They planted crops. They dug wells. Nothing worked. So they quit. They had no choice." Before riding away, the old man paused. "If you're smart, you'll sell it while someone still wants it." Dust followed him down the road. Marcus watched until he disappeared. That night he slept inside the old shed. Rain tapped gently against the damaged roof. Water dripped through broken boards into rusty buckets. Sleep wouldn't come. Instead, he opened his grandfather's notebook again. One loose page slipped onto the floor. He had never noticed it before. On the back was a short sentence written in darker ink. "The answer isn't under the hill. Follow the road." Marcus sat upright. The road! The missing road, the old survey, the darker strip across the field. Everything suddenly connected. Before sunrise, he grabbed a flashlight and walked toward the center of the property. Morning fog covered the ground, hiding his boots with every step. He reached the darker strip and began clearing away tall weeds. Slowly, a row of flat stones appeared beneath the grass, one after another, perfectly straight, not random, not natural. It was the forgotten road. Marcus followed it until it disappeared beneath decades of dirt near the hill where his shovel had struck metal. He knelt again. This time he dug with careful hands instead of heavy swings. A few inches below the surface, the flashlight reflected off something larger than before, not just metal. A thick iron ring attached to what looked like a heavy wooden hatch. Marcus brushed away more soil until the outline became clear. His breathing slowed. Someone hadn't buried treasure. Someone had hidden an entrance. He wrapped both hands around the iron ring and pulled. The hatch refused to move. Then, from somewhere beneath it, heard a sound, a faint echo, like empty space waiting in the darkness below. Marcus let go of the iron ring so quickly that he fell backward into the dirt. The sound had been soft, almost impossible to hear, but it hadn't come from the wind. It had come from below. He stayed perfectly still. The morning air was quiet except for birds waking in the distant trees. His heartbeat seemed louder than everything else. Slowly, he leaned closer and placed one hand on the wooden hatch. Cold. Solid. Very old. He knocked on it with his knuckles. A hollow echo answered from beneath. "There really is something down there," he whispered. The hatch was too heavy to lift alone. Marcus spent the next hour searching the old shed until he found a rusted crowbar buried beneath broken boards and dusty buckets. It wasn't much, but it was enough. He pushed the end beneath the edge of the hatch and leaned his full weight against it. Nothing. He tried again, still nothing. On the third attempt, the wood groaned. A cloud of dust burst into the air as one corner lifted only an inch before dropping shut again. Marcus stepped back, breathing hard. Whatever lay below had stayed hidden for decades. It wasn't going to reveal itself easily. He drove into town for thicker gloves, rope, and fresh batteries for his flashlight. As he walked through the hardware store, two men looked at the dirt covering his boots. "You digging wells already?" one asked with a grin. Marcus smiled politely. "Just cleaning up the property." The men laughed. "You'll be cleaning it forever." He said nothing. The less people knew, the better. By late afternoon, he returned to the hillside. This time, he tied the rope securely around the iron ring and attached the other end to the hitch on his pickup truck. He climbed behind the wheel. For a moment he hesitated. If the hatch broke, whatever was underneath could be damaged forever. He eased the truck forward. The rope tightened. The hatch groaned. Wood cracked. Then, with a deep scraping sound, it shifted several inches. Marcus stopped immediately. He climbed out and hurried over. A narrow opening had appeared. Cool air drifted upward. It carried the smell of damp earth mixed with something else. Old wood, old metal, history. He widened the opening just enough to shine his flashlight inside. Stone steps disappeared into darkness. His pulse quickened. Someone had built this, not recently, long ago. Marcus tied the rope around a nearby oak tree, tested each step with his boot, and slowly began climbing down. The air grew cooler with every step. The light from above became smaller until only the flashlight cut through the darkness. At the bottom, he found himself standing inside a narrow underground tunnel. Stone walls surrounded him. The ceiling was supported by thick wooden beams, blackened with age but still standing. His footsteps echoed softly. Every sound reminded him that no one had walked here in many years. He moved carefully. Spider webs stretched across the passage. Dust covered everything. About 20 feet ahead, the tunnel opened into a small room. Marcus swept the flashlight across it. Old wooden crates, broken lanterns, rusted farming tools, nothing that looked valuable. His shoulders dropped slightly. Maybe this had simply been an old storage cellar. Then his light landed on a wooden table against the far wall. Resting on top was a small tin box. Unlike everything else, it wasn't buried under thick dust. Someone had touched it. Long after everything else had been forgotten, Marcus opened the lid carefully. Inside lay several folded papers tied together with faded blue string. Underneath them rested a silver pocket watch. Its glass was cracked. Its hands had stopped at exactly 4:17. Marcus recognized it immediately. His grandfather had carried that watch in every family photograph. His breath caught. How did this get here? With trembling hands, he unfolded the first paper. It wasn't a letter. It was a hand-drawn map, far more detailed than the one inside the notebook. Red markings covered sections of the property. Small notes filled the edges. One sentence had been written larger than all the others. The land is not the treasure. Protect what it hides. Marcus frowned. What did that mean? He searched through the remaining papers. Most were weather notes, crop records, measurements. Then he found the final page. The handwriting looked hurried, almost desperate. If anyone else finds this before my family does, the valley will disappear forever. Before Marcus could read another word, a loud thud echoed from above. He froze. Another thud followed, heavy footsteps. Someone was walking across the hatch, and judging by the voices drifting down through the opening. He was no longer alone on the property. Marcus quickly switched off his flashlight. The tunnel disappeared into complete darkness. Above him, muffled voices drifted through the opening. I told you he was digging out here. Another voice answered, lower and rougher. Just look around. He can't hide much on land like this. Marcus held his breath. He knew those voices. They belonged to two ranchers from the diner. They had laughed when he mentioned buying the property. Now they were standing directly above the hidden entrance. A boot scraped across the wooden hatch. You think he found something? One man asked. If he did, it belongs to the people who owned this valley long before he came along. Marcus frowned. That didn't sound like a joke. The men stayed for several minutes before their footsteps slowly faded into the distance. Marcus waited even longer. Only when the silence returned did he switch the flashlight back on. His eyes returned to the papers in his hands. The final page mentioned one thing again and again. The spring, not gold, not silver, not oil, just the spring. He searched the room once more. Behind the wooden table stood a narrow stone wall with a faded symbol carved into it. It looked almost like flowing water. Beneath it was a small metal lever nearly hidden by years of dust. Marcus hesitated. His grandfather had always warned him not to force old machinery. Still, he wrapped both hands around the lever and pulled. At first, nothing happened. Then came a deep grinding sound. Stone rubbed against stone somewhere beyond the wall. A section of rock slowly slid sideways, revealing another passage. Cold air rushed toward him. Unlike the stale air in the storage room, this breeze smelled fresh. Clean, alive, Marcus followed the tunnel. The floor sloped gently downward. The sound reached him before the light did. Water, moving water. His pace quickened. The passage opened into a wide underground chamber, and Marcus stopped in disbelief. Crystal clear water flowed through the center of the cave, shining beneath thin beams of sunlight pouring through tiny cracks high above. The stream wasn't small. It was powerful, strong enough to supply hundreds of acres. Marcus stared silently. Every ranch around Harper County struggled through dry summers. Every year farmers prayed for rain, yet beneath the so-called worthless land flowed enough fresh water to change everything. His grandfather hadn't hidden treasure. He had protected a lifeline. Marcus knelt beside the stream. The water was ice cold. He filled his hands and took a drink. It tasted cleaner than anything he had ever known. Then he noticed something else. Metal pipes, old ones, hidden beneath layers of stone. They stretched away from the underground spring toward the valley. Someone had once built an irrigation system here, a brilliant one. But why abandon it? Marcus followed the pipes until they disappeared beneath a collapsed section of tunnel. Large rocks blocked the way. Beyond them, faint daylight peeked through. The system had been buried, not destroyed. Buried. Someone had wanted people to forget it existed. His flashlight landed on another wooden sign half covered in dirt. The faded letters were barely readable. Reed Cooperative Water Project. Marcus's heart skipped. Reed, his family name. His grandfather hadn't simply farmed here. He had helped build this place. Marcus remembered stories his mother used to tell about neighbors sharing harvests during difficult years, about farmers helping each other instead of competing. Had this been part of that dream? Footsteps echoed again, not above this time, inside the tunnel. Marcus spun around. A flashlight beam flickered in the distance. Someone else had found the entrance. He switched off his own light immediately. The approaching footsteps slowed. A familiar voice called softly into the darkness. Marcus. It wasn't one of the ranchers. It was Evelyn Brooks, the county clerk who had handed him the old property records. Marcus, I know you're down here. He stepped cautiously into the light. Evelyn, she lowered her flashlight. I hoped I'd find you before they did. What are you talking about? She looked toward the underground stream. My grandfather helped build this tunnel. Marcus's eyes widened. He told me there would come a day when someone named Reed would come back. She reached into her coat pocket and unfolded an old black and white photograph. It showed 6 smiling farmers standing beside the same underground spring decades earlier. Marcus recognized one face instantly. His grandfather, standing shoulder to shoulder with Evelyn's grandfather. Both men were holding the same silver pocket watch Marcus had found only minutes earlier. Evelyn looked directly at him. They didn't hide this place to keep people out. She paused, her voice almost breaking. They hid it because someone powerful wanted to own every drop of water in this valley. Before Marcus could answer, the distant sound of engines echoed from above. Several trucks had just pulled onto the property, and this time, they hadn't come to laugh. The rumble of truck engines rolled across the hillside like distant thunder. Marcus and Evelyn looked at each other without saying a word. Someone had discovered the truth. The question was how much they already knew. Marcus slipped the silver pocket watch into his jacket pocket and carefully folded the maps back into the tin box. We can't leave these here, he whispered. Evelyn nodded. They're proof. Together they climbed the stone steps and pushed the hatch open just enough to look outside. 3 pickup trucks were parked near the broken shed. Several local ranchers stood beside them, including the 2 men from the diner. But Marcus quickly realized they weren't leading the group. An older man in a clean western jacket was giving orders. His polished boots looked strangely out of place on the dusty ground. Evelyn's face turned pale. I know him. Who is he? Calvin Mercer. Marcus frowned. The biggest landowner in the county, she nodded. He owns almost everything around here. Mercer walked slowly across the hillside, studying the ground with careful eyes. I don't care what it costs, he said. Find whatever he's been digging. Marcus understood immediately. Mercer hadn't come for the land, he had come for the water. The 2 slipped quietly out of the tunnel from the opposite side of the hill and made their way through the trees until they reached Marcus's truck. Inside, Marcus spread the old maps across the hood. Evelyn pointed to several faded markings. My grandfather wrote these. Marcus looked closer. The underground spring connected to nearly every ranch in the valley through old stone channels. Years ago, families had shared the water freely. No one owned it. Everyone depended on it. So what happened? Evelyn sighed. The project ended after a terrible drought. People became afraid. Wealthy ranchers started buying land and the tunnels were sealed. Most families believed the spring had dried up. But it never did. No. Marcus looked back toward the property. His grandfather hadn't hidden wealth for his family alone. He had protected something meant for everyone. That evening, Marcus and Evelyn visited several elderly residents whose families had lived in Harper County for generations. One by one, they unfolded the old photograph. Faces softened, memories returned. An 87-year-old retired farmer smiled through tears. I remember that spring. My father said it saved our crops. Another woman reached into an old wooden chest and pulled out a faded newspaper clipping. The headline read, Local Farmers Build Shared Water Project. The story named every family involved. Both Reed and Brooks were listed among the founders. Marcus felt something shift inside him. For months, he had believed this journey was about saving his own future. Now he understood. It had never been only about him. The next morning, word spread through the county, not because Marcus held a press conference, not because he argued, because the truth had finally found its way home. Families gathered near the old property carrying photographs, journals, and handwritten records passed down through generations. Each story matched another. Each memory filled another missing piece. By afternoon, county officials arrived to inspect the site. Engineers carefully entered the underground tunnels. Hours later, they confirmed what Marcus already knew. The spring was real. The irrigation system could be restored. Mercer stood silently at the edge of the crowd. For the first time since Marcus had met him, he had nothing to say. The land everyone had mocked was no longer worthless. But Marcus surprised everyone again. When officials asked whether he planned to sell the property, he smiled and shook his head. "No." A reporter stepped forward. "Then what will you do with it?" Marcus looked across the valley where neighbors stood talking together instead of arguing. "My grandfather believed some things should never belong to just one person." Within months, volunteers repaired sections of the old tunnels. Local farmers worked side by side just as their grandparents once had. Fresh water flowed again beneath the valley. Fields that had struggled for years slowly turned green. The broken windmill on Marcus's land remained exactly where it had always stood. He never replaced it. It reminded him where the journey had begun. The silver pocket watch sat on a shelf inside the restored farmhouse. It no longer represented a forgotten mystery. It represented a promise kept across generations. Sometimes Marcus would hold it before walking outside at sunrise. He would listen to the wind moving across healthy fields and think about the sentence his grandfather had written inside that worn leather notebook. "Don't judge the land too quickly." He finally understood those words. People often walk away from things that look broken. Dreams, places, even other people. But some of the greatest treasures in life are simply waiting for someone patient enough to look beneath the surface. If this story stayed with you, I'd be honored if you joined me for the next one. There are many more remarkable journeys still waiting to be discovered.